Part 5 of Introduction to Synthesizers, I'm going to look at the three synthesis methods: frequency modulation, phase distortion, and linear arithmetic. The frequency modulation method used by Yamaha's DX synthesizers seems to confuse people quite a lot, so we'll look at this in some depth, try and get a handle on what the heck's going on inside these machines. All of these three methods are quite capable of producing variation in harmonic content over the period of time of the envelope shape. They don't actually need any form of subtractive filter. The method itself is able to produce variation in harmonic content. That's not to say you can't have subtractive filter as well, and in some instances that's exactly what you find is the case. So firstly, to the DX series keyboards which use the frequency modulation technique. There are four parameters we need to understand in order to get a handle on what these machines are doing: the modulator, carrier, algorithm, and operator. Some of the Yamaha keyboards are either 4 or 6 operator, and what this means is that each of those machines will have 4 or 6 elements that combine a carrier and a modulator to produce one complex sound, and those 4 or 6 sounds are then combined in some particular way to produce the overall complex sound. The way that the operators are combined is the algorithm, and this is usually shown on the front fascia and shows you which way the operators are combined to produce the net sound. The carrier and modulator are basic tone generators, but instead of being mixed together, they are multiplied together, and very complex sounds come out of a single operator. I think what foxes people about the DX type of keyboards is not only the synthesis method, but the way in which the controls are implemented on the front fascia of the DX type keyboard. There's really so many controls and so many things which affect the overall sound that trying to understand which one does which thing becomes quite a complex affair. I have a sound programmed into the DX100 which is using algorithm 3. I've actually called it Lyricin 2, but that's just something you can do with these sounds, is name them so you know which one is which. Algorithm 3 uses the 4 operators in the following way. 3 is stacked upon 2, is stacked upon 1, and operator 4 is able to feed back on itself and then modulate operator 1. The thing to note about these keyboards is that the final operator, operator 1, if it is switched off, you'll get no sound whatsoever. Sometimes seen this on like eBay, somewhere like that, and people say, I don't know whether this keyboard is working. Sometimes what happens is the internal memory goes dead. There's sometimes memory backup batteries inside these machines, and if there's no parameters set, especially for this operator 1, there'll be no sound out of the machine, and it doesn't mean it's not working, it just means you haven't programmed it yet. So that's something to take account of when you're dealing with operators and carriers and modulators. So with our preset Lyricin 2, there are 4 operators, and operator 1 is the final operator, so it has to be switched on in order to have any sound whatsoever. The switches for controlling the particular operators are on the bank buttons, but we first have to be in edit compare mode, which on this machine is a blue button marked edit compare, and you press that, and then there's like a second function button, and once you press this, you've then got access to the controls to switch the operators on and off. So I've got operator 1 switched on, and if I play a note, you can hear it's a kind of sine wave tone. Then I'm going to add in the other operators, so we'll add in operator 2. And then operator 3. Now finally operator 4. And that's the final tone. If we need some variation in the tone characteristics of these machines, we can actually plug in the breath controller, and this will give us some variation in the tone. Again, you have to go back to the programming controls in order to tell it that it's got a breath controller attached and what settings it's going to vary. On the D series keyboards with Roland's linear arithmetic, they've got the facility for breath control but no breath controller input. So what you can do there is send MIDI commands to it and it will have the same effect. If you've got something like DX100 and breath controller, you can then use the breath control from that to control the Roland keyboards or anything else that's got any kind of command for breath controller input. If you've got some kind of control software, I'm using MIDI OX, which is free download from the internet, you can alter the commands from any kind of controller. I've got information on the internet as to how to use a DH100 Casio's digital horn to control breath control on something like a DX synthesizer, because that actually produces aftertouch information, and we'll be coming back to MIDI information in its own section on its own video. If I now alter the frequency ratio parameter on the DX100, which again is under Edit Compare on button 13, we now have to select which operator it is it's going to affect the frequency ratio of, and this is done by pressing the pitch mode button, which is marked operator select. So if I change the basic frequency of operator 1, it becomes like a rather growling bell type sound. And this is what we find with the DX synthesizers in general. If you haven't got the frequency ratio settings set quite correct, you'll end up with these enharmonic tones which sound rather like bells. So DX synthesizers are really quite good at producing bell type tones because of the synthesis method, and if you arrange the envelope shape correctly, you'll end up with a pretty sophisticated bell type sound. Similarly, the phase distortion method, because it uses a similar kind of technique, is capable of producing these enharmonic tones as well. If you play around with the detune setting on button 14, you'll find this introduces phasing type effects. If you've got something like a string effect in mind, then it's a good idea to detune one of the operators from one of the other ones, and that introduces slight variations between the modulating frequencies, and that's what introduces those kind of long phasing effects. And if we alter button 15, which is the attack time on the envelope shape, and this is on still on operator 1, which is controlling the volume, the net volume output of the tone, what we'll hear is that the sound takes a longer time to introduce itself. In particular, if the attack time is 0, you'll never get any sound initiated at all. So again, if you've got a parameter setting of 0, this means that the sound won't be produced. So you have to have at least some form of attack before you get any sound at all. So I'm going to just change it so that it's quite slow. So the attack time there. And I'm going to change the attack time now on the other operators so we can hear how that gets affected. So this is operator 2 with a slow attack time. Then do operator 3 and then operator 4. And finally, I'll put the frequency ratio back where it was, so we get our original sound Lyricin 2, but now with slow attack times on all 4 operators. And now we can hear that it takes a long time to introduce those harmonics. So, in this way we can control the actual dynamics of the sound. Once we introduce our breath controller, then we've got control over the harmonics on the hoof, and of course we've got our pitch bender and modulation controls, and then you end up sounding something a bit like this. The envelope shaping characteristics on a DX FM keyboard use more parameters than the standard ADSR that we've been used to from the first video in the series. The characteristics that the various parameters control are shown on the front fascia, and it's therefore got more control over the envelope shape. We'll find out later that the phase distortion method actually uses 8 stages of envelope shape, which is even more sophisticated still, so it's not the bee's knees to have 5 steps of envelope shape. There are, of course, many other parameters on a DX keyboard, and I can't go into all of them here without doing a special exercise on programming a DX synthesizer, but this is just a basic introduction to how these synthesizers work. Okay, so we'll move on to the CZ series and their phase distortion method. And that's what the CZ101 sounds like on its basic brass setting. That's one of the presets that the manufacturer has given you. Of course, you can then fool around with all the parameters and come up with different odd sounds. And in that last sound there we heard the multi-stage envelope setting, which produces a kind of echo effect, because once you've done an ADSR you can do another ADSR, which is quite a clever system. Incidentally, the 8-stage envelope I think is also used on the VZ1 and FZ1, so the FZ1's not only got analog filters doing subtractive synthesis on your samples, it's also got an 8-stage envelope, which is really, really weird, so that's quite a sought after piece of musical apparatus. The idea of the phase distortion keyboards is that we alter the phase angle on the produced waveform rather than multiply waveforms together. It still produces variation in harmonic content, and in the particular keyboards, the CZ series, what Casio have done, you've got 2 separate oscillator systems, at least as far as the CZ1000 and CZ101 are concerned. And each of these is capable of generating one of the particular waveforms. There's actually 8 waveforms, some of them with resonance built into them. And the waveforms are selected in combination for the DCOs. And then the phase angle can be altered on the hoof using a particular envelope shape. So we're using our 8-stage envelope shaper. Acting like a filter is actually called DCW on the CZ series. And then they have a conventional amplifier, DCA, which again is an 8-stage envelope control. So instead of having filters, we're altering the phase angle. And that's how the CZ series are creating their sounds. So starting with the brass sound, I press the waveform button on DC01, and that gives me 2 waveforms. The DCW will move from between the first waveform and the second waveform. There's actually no second waveform in this, so what will happen is it will step through the waveforms. The first waveform, the one that's producing the brass sound, is the triangle waveform, which sounds like, and then I'll step through them. So we've got number 2, which is square wave. Number 3, which is pulse. 4. This is 5. And 6, 7, and 8, which are all variously resonance. So 6. 7. And 8. It's perhaps worth mentioning that you can't choose certain combinations of waveforms for the pair in any one waveform for a DCO. So for instance, you can't have any of the resonance waveforms with each other. So this is not a fault of the equipment, it's actually choices that have been ordained by the manufacturer. The CZ series has also got key follow, which means that you can change the harmonic content or the way that the envelope operates up and down the keyboard, so it scales up and down the keyboard. Some of the Yamaha keyboards do this, and that makes it sound much more like a conventional instrument, which as their harmonic content changes depending on which pitch you play. The envelope shapers are also on the pitch for the CZ series, so you can get, I think the DX11 does that too, so you get pitch rising and falling depending on whether you press the key. I know for a fact that the DX100, you can do this with the breath controller also, and this is intended to mimic sort of small changes in pitch when you blow into something, but it can end up going quite a large way outside of the normal pitch of the key. So it is as well to use some discretion when messing about with that parameter. So we've got two DCOs, both with key following and both with envelope shapers, both 8-stage envelope shaping, and the envelope shaping on the CZ series is almost like a programming language. You have to set the sustain point, and you also have to set the end point for the envelopes. So you step through each stage of the envelope saying how long it's going to last and which height it is. There's actually a little diagram on the front fascia that tells you how to do that. But if you want to start from a particular set of parameters, they've conveniently given you like a default initialized state, which allows you to set up all the parameters so that you at least get a sound out of the machine. So again, if you've got like battery failure or something of this nature, you can have the belief that the machine is not actually functioning when really it's just not been programmed. So that initialize button will give you default status. There's also sometimes a reset mechanism on the Casio CZs. I think it's like a pencil dot, something underneath the keyboard itself, which you have to shove a pen into, and that will reset the machine's internal memories so that you get the default manufacturer's presets. I know that my CZ1000, if you leave it switched off for a long time, all of the parameters inside go haywire, and you end up with all sorts of pernickety things inside the parameters. The LCD display goes bonkers, so you have to reset it before it will actually start functioning normally. All of these keyboards, of course, have modulation controls, which is not to be confused with the modulation on the DX series. The modulator, of course, is the introduction of vibrato. On the CZ series, we've got no vibrato control as such. There's no bender for doing this. There's only pitch bend. But it does have vibrato controls, and in this case, the LFO has got 4 wave shapes. I think it's the case in the DX series. They've got several wave shapes as well. So as well as the classic sort of sine wave or triangle wave vibrato, you can also get like square wave modulation. Which sounds a bit like that. As well as the 2 DCOs on the CZ series, they also allow you to mix 2 of the tones together. So this goes back to what I was saying about layering, which we'll come back to in the MIDI section, that you can have more than one tone operating at once. So that was a long sound there, with resonance in it as well as our brass with the modulation going, and that was 2 tones. So you can create some quite sophisticated effects with a CZ. It also allows you to have portamento, otherwise known as glide, which moves between one note and the next. But the DX series also does that, and this is what portamento sounds like. And with a longer time parameter, we can get it up to 99. Two other parameters that the CZ series gives us are ring modulation and noise modulation. Noise modulation introduces those kind of noises that might be at the beginning of when you're blowing into something, or for producing wind type effects. So I'm going to add the noise modulation into the sound that's currently on, which I think is brass. So. And if we switch over to ring modulation, you get a kind of bell sounding tone. Which has got N harmonic frequencies in there, and that's why you get that kind of weird sounding tone out of that. If we want the modulation effect only to appear in a certain place in the envelope sequence, then you need to make sure that the envelope sequence is only on the second oscillator, and then use that as in your line select so that you've got 1 plus 2 on the line select, and that there's no sustain period on the second envelope DCA. And then you can get your noise component or your ring modulation component to appear only for a short period of time. So we'll have a noise effect like, or a ring modulation effect that's only at the beginning of the envelope. So with our 8-stage envelopes and our pitch envelope, we can get some rather weird sounding sounds. Both the CZ and the DX series have a compare recall function which holds the current sound that you're editing in memory to compare it with the one that you've already stored away in its memory banks. In the case of the DX, there's a memory lock function so you don't accidentally overwrite the sound that you've created so far. In the case of the CZ, there's a write button that you have to press in combination with the button that you want to store the sound under, otherwise it won't store. So both of them have got a mechanism whereby your sounds stay in memory. What happens to the sounds in both cases is you might need to back them up somewhere else. The Casio system uses a cartridge mechanism, so they have a plug-in cartridge. You can also store the sounds to a PC using the system exclusive function. Again, this will come back to in the MIDI section, the MIDI video. And the DX series can also save to cassette, so you can store your sounds on cassette or PC using the system exclusive. Again, I use MIDI OX downloaded from the internet to store system exclusive dumps to the PC. I've actually set the DCOs on the CZ to have different wave shapes. So I've got number 1 on DCO1 and number 4 on DCO2. The line select button at the end of the keyboard is the thing that chooses what those oscillators actually do in combination. So we've got the first choice is number 1, the second choice is number 2, and then we've got 1 plus 2. It's also showing a line to the modulation section, so we only get the modulation happening on the third and fourth choices. And the fourth choice is 1 with itself, so it's 1 with a modulation with itself. And if I play the original brass sound with the new combination of oscillators, at first we don't notice much difference if we're on line select 1. If we're on line select 2, we'll hear a slight difference. And if I play them in combination with each other, we've got a different effect there. What I'm going to do is alter the attack rate on DCO1 for its DCW, and then we'll hear the rate at which the first oscillator comes in is less than the second one. So we'll hear 2 envelope shapes like this. So we get a second brass sound coming in after the first brass sound. So we can use the envelope shapers from both DCOs in combination to get really quite complex envelope shapes. And finally we come to Roland's linear arithmetic synthesis, which really is a combination of PCM and subtractive synthesis combined in the same system, so we've got some idea what's going on with those two already. A new term to add to our vocabulary from Roland is partials, where they're referring to the different segments of sound that are made up from both the PCM and the subtractive synthesis, creating 2 different partial contributions to the sound. Here we've also got a system of time variant amplifier and time variant filters, which is their idea of a VCF, voltage controlled filter, and voltage controlled amplifier from the original synthesizers that were analog. So we've got basically sort of 2 synthesizers in the same machine to create the sound. Of course, they've got a drum machine in there as well, so that's also PCM based. Because we've got two different synthesizer methods inside the D series, this isn't particularly easy to program, and the layout of the programming is a menu-driven system, and finding your way about it isn't the easiest affair. The D series has two ROM banks, marked A and B. The I bank, which is basically the user area for you to store your own sounds in, and the R bank, which is the rhythm system. The way in which the different systems are combined in the LA system is called a structure, which is similar to Yamaha's idea of an algorithm, so it's how the particular sound generating components are connected together. The structure also contains the possibility of having a ring modulator connected, so similar to the CZ series, you've got the capacity to make bell sounds, so you've got bell tones coming out of that. So it's quite good at producing bell tones because of the ring modulator. There is also complex enveloping and the ability to dump your sounds to either a backup memory device, in this case a RAM card, or the system exclusive method, which uses the MIDI controls. D series also has performance parameters, so it does clever tricks like arpeggio. It can generate harmonies and also play a chord on one key by selecting the chord on the lower half of the keyboard and then playing a key on the top half. I'm not going to go into fully how to program a Roland D series. The menu system has all the parameters laid out, and referring to the manual, like all these keyboards, helps to understand what's going on. But I hope we've given you some clue as to how to start off.